The night was so black that even the ocean seemed to disappear into it. No moon, no stars, no horizon. Only the low hum of engines and the invisible weight of thousands of miles of open water. Every sailor aboard the USS Alabama knew this silence. They had crossed it for months, hunting an enemy they could not see, preparing for a moment they were not sure would ever come. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, an electric tension that rolled across the steel decks like a storm waiting to break. Somewhere out there, hidden by the darkness and the distance, the Imperial Japanese Navy was coming. For years, they had dominated the night. Their torpedoes were whispered about like sea monsters. Their destroyers moved like ghosts. Even the most hardened American sailors respected their night attacks, because many who didn't never lived to tell the story. But the sailors aboard Alabama had brought something new with them, something the enemy had never faced. A weapon that could see without eyes. A weapon that did not need the moon, or flares, or instinct. A weapon that turned darkness into death. Tonight, Alabama would not wait to be hunted. Tonight, she would become the storm. Men stood at their stations, hands hovering over triggers, breath held, eyes fixed on a glowing screen that pulsed like a heartbeat. Not a single enemy ship was visible on the horizon, but the radar saw them. Blips on a dark glass screen. Signals in the void. That was enough. One order, one firing solution, one pull of the trigger, and the sea would explode. This is not the story of a battleship. This is the story of a moment. One night in the vastness of the Pacific when steel, fire, and technology collided with tradition, courage, and fate. A night when a single ship proved that the age of battles was changing forever. USS Alabama had always been a survivor. Built under pressure, rushed into war, sent across oceans and into battles where the stakes were not just territory, but the future. She was born into a world that was ending, and engineered for the world that would replace it. Unlike the warships of old, Alabama did not rely on luck or moonlight or the sharp eyes of men with binoculars. Her most important weapon was invisible. Her eyes were made of electricity and numbers, and her brain was made of gears, circuits, and calculations faster than any human could think. That weapon was radar. When Alabama reached the Pacific, she joined the fast carrier task forces, the beating heart of America's naval power. She fought in the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the Marianas. She guarded aircraft that turned islands into ashes. She brought home men who would not have survived without her guns. But her reputation was not built in daylight. It was forged at night. On this night, somewhere west of the Marianas, the sea was calm, slick like oil. The dark was suffocating. The stars were swallowed by low clouds that rolled like smoke across the sky. No one spoke unless they had to. They didn't need to. War had taught them how to hear the silence. In the plotting room, the radar screen flickered. One blip, then another, then a cluster, a formation, 10, maybe 12 enemy aircraft, flying low, approaching fast. The Japanese believed they were unseen. They believed they owned the night. For decades, they had mastered it. But tonight their enemy was not blind. Alabama's radar picked them up before any lookout heard the engines. The information traveled instantly to the gunnery computers, massive analog brains bolted inside armored steel rooms. They translated distance, bearing, speed, altitude, wind, roll of the ship, and even humidity into one simple command: fire. Turrets turned as if guided by an unseen hand. The giant barrels lifted into the dark sky. The men at the guns could see nothing. They fired at ghosts. But the radar did not miss. The first salvo rose like thunder. A streak of fire and steel carved the darkness. And then the night turned white. Explosions bloomed in the sky like burning flowers. Airplanes that thought they were invisible suddenly burst into flames without ever knowing who killed them. The Japanese pilots didn't understand. They had survived flak before. They had dodged searchlights. They had outmaneuvered gunners. But they had never fought a weapon that could kill them before human eyes could even see them. This was not battle. This was execution. This was the steel rain. Wave after wave tried to break through. Alabama cut them down one by one. Some never got within 5 miles. Others tried to dive through the fire and were shredded in midair, wings torn away like paper. One bomber, burning but still alive, tried to crash into the ship. The gunners didn't even aim manually. The directors tracked it automatically. It never got close. By dawn, the sea was littered with oil, debris, and silence. Not a single bomb struck Alabama. Not a single plane made it past her guns. For the first time, the men who had feared Japan's night attacks realized that the balance had shifted. Alabama proved that the darkness was no longer a weapon, it was a trap. Her victory that night was more than tactical. It was symbolic. The age of the night raider was over. The age of radar had begun. Alabama would continue through the war. Bombardment at Okinawa, kamikaze screens, endless nights at battle stations. But the legend was born on that invisible battlefield where no eye could see and no man could judge distance except through a humming screen and the trust that science was now as deadly as steel. And yet, in all the years that followed, Alabama never forgot that night. The men who survived never forgot the sound. Not the explosions, not the yelling, but the silence before the first shot, when the whole crew understood that war had changed, and they were the ones who changed it. Many battleships earned glory. Many fired bigger guns, sailed longer, or stood in photographs signing surrender documents. But only one ship turned the night against the empire that once ruled it. USS Alabama did not just fight. She rewrote the rules. And in that moment, on that night deep in the Pacific, when the sky burned like molten steel and radar guided the guns like the hand of fate, she delivered a message that echoed across the ocean, across history, across the future of warfare itself. The sun rose, but no one on Alabama felt daylight. Their minds were still in the night, still hearing radar pulses echo like distant thunder, still smelling burnt fuel drifting over the sea like a ghost. The battle was over, but the war was not finished, not for Alabama, not for the Pacific, not for the men whose lives were measured in watches, alarms, and the constant grind of steel beneath their feet. They had won a single night. Now they prepared to win the next. By 1944, the Pacific Ocean was not just water. It was a battlefield that stretched like an endless wound across the world. The Japanese Empire still held island fortresses, fortified bays, and airfields carved into volcanic rock. Every mile had to be fought for. Every island had to be taken. And every ship, no matter how powerful, could be destroyed in a heartbeat by a torpedo, a dive bomber, or a single mistake. But Alabama was not a normal battleship. The night had changed her reputation. Word spread among the fleet, whispers that Alabama could see in the dark, that she could hit enemies beyond the horizon, that she was protected by something more than steel and armor. Sailors started calling her the blind killer. It was not fear, it was respect. That respect was earned again just weeks later. The fleet was moving toward the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. The Japanese knew what it meant. These islands were not just land, they were stepping stones to the empire itself. If the Americans took them, Japan would be in bombing range. Everything was at stake, and Japan responded. They sent submarines. They sent reconnaissance planes. They prepared their fleet for the largest carrier battle in history. But what they feared most were the American carriers, and those carriers had a shield, Task Force 58, and at the heart of that shield stood Alabama. It was early morning when the radar operator noticed something strange, faint signals, far out, barely visible. Most ships would have missed it. Alabama didn't. Within minutes, the ship was alive again. General quarters. Men ran to their stations, boots crashing against the steel decks. There were no speeches, no time for fear. They moved like a machine, practiced, precise, deadly. The operators watched the signal tighten. Not aircraft, not surface ships. Torpedoes were coming, launched from miles away, long before any human eye could see them. Underwater, silent, unseen, ghost weapons cutting through the dark sea. Alabama had seconds to respond. The ship turned. The engines roared, gears grinding, the steel hull shuddering beneath the force of physics and fate. A torpedo could crack a ship like Alabama in half. One hit, and decades of engineering, millions of dollars, and thousands of lives could vanish beneath the waves. But the radar did not just see enemies above the surface, it mapped the sea itself. Using sonar, using calculations, using the same cold precision that guided her guns, Alabama dodged the unseen killers. The torpedoes missed, one by less than 50 yards. And then Alabama struck back. Her aircraft spotted the submarine. Depth charges dropped. The sea erupted. A steel shape broke the surface like a dying animal. The last thing its crew ever heard was the sound of a battleship they never even saw. The message was clear: not in the sky, not on the water, not under the waves. Nowhere was safe from the steel rain. That night, the men slept lighter. Not because they feared death, but because they had seen what their ship could do. Alabama was not just surviving war. She was shaping it, and the ocean was beginning to understand. June 19, 1944. The day would be remembered forever, not by the men who started it, but by the ones who survived it. It began like any other morning aboard USS Alabama: gray light, humid wind, the distant rumble of the Pacific rolling against the hull. But by afternoon, the sky itself would become a graveyard. The Japanese Empire was desperate. Their carriers were still afloat. Their planes were fueled. Their pilots were told they would win back the Pacific. The plan was simple: break through the American defenses, destroy the fleet, save the Marianas, and stop the invasion that would soon put bombers within reach of Tokyo. They called it Operation Ego. To the Japanese, this was their last chance to take back the war. To the Americans, it became something else entirely: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. From the moment radar detected the first wave, Alabama was ready. Dozens, then hundreds of enemy aircraft were rising from distant carriers. Betty bombers, Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo planes, enough aircraft to turn the sea black if they reached the fleet. But they never would. Alabama saw them before they saw her. Radar tracked the altitude, the bearing, the speed, the composition. The gunnery computers calculated strike patterns and firing arcs before human instinct could even understand what was happening. The first wave broke over the horizon like a storm of wings. The sky lit up. Fighters from the American carriers launched, Hellcats tearing upward like arrows of steel. They tore the Japanese formation apart before it even formed. But some got through, scattered, wounded, driven by desperation and orders they did not dare question. That's when Alabama opened fire. The ship did not fire one gun at a time. She unleashed entire batteries. Each shell exploded in midair with a blossom of steel fragments invisible to the naked eye but fatal to anything with wings. Japanese pilots described it as flying into a wall. One moment they were soaring, the next their planes were coming apart under invisible knives of metal. From the ship, it looked like stars were dying in daylight. Planes burned in midair. Some never made it within 10 miles. Others plunged into the ocean with a hiss of steam and gasoline. A few tried to strike the ship itself, kamikaze tactics before the word existed, but they were shredded before they reached the range of their own guns. The sea became quiet again, not because the battle was over, but because there was almost nothing left to shoot. By nightfall, more than 300 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed. Some squadrons never returned. Some pilots vanished into ocean without ever firing a single bullet. It was the death of Japanese naval aviation, and Alabama was there, eyes open, guns hot, radar humming like the heartbeat of a machine that was becoming the future. The legend of that day spread through the fleet. Some told it like a joke: they just flew right into it. Others whispered it like a warning: that's what happens when courage meets technology. But the truth was much simpler. The age of the warrior had met the age of the machine. And the machine did not break. Not that day. Not ever. USS Alabama didn't just defend the fleet, she helped bury an entire empire's navy in a single afternoon. That was the day the sky died. And Alabama pulled the trigger. The war was changing. Japan was cornered, wounded, bleeding, but still dangerous. Every mile the Americans advanced made the enemy more desperate. And desperation in war is a weapon more terrifying than any steel or fire. USS Alabama did not return home. She went forward, toward the Philippines, toward the South China Sea. toward the final gate of the Pacific, Okinawa. If the Marianas were the turning point, Okinawa was the reckoning. Thousands of Japanese aircraft were gone, but the Empire had found a new strategy. A weapon not of bombs or torpedoes, but of men. Men who chose death before defeat. Men who turned their planes into guided missiles. Kamikazes. The word alone made every sailor's heartbeat change. No tactic in the war was more unpredictable, more terrifying, more unstoppable than a human being who had already accepted death. Battleships were no longer just fighting machinery, they were fighting intent. But Alabama was ready. She had seen the future in radar. She had seen the sky die in the Marianas. And now she would face the last storm of the Pacific. The fleet approached Okinawa under constant threat. Alarms became routine. Smoke trails in the distance meant death was coming. Radar operators lived on coffee and nerves. Gunners slept beside their weapons. The ocean felt smaller every day. Then, on a gray morning, the warning came. Multiple aircraft. Low altitude. Fast. The alarm sounded. Every man knew he might only have seconds. Alabama's guns turned all at once. Not like the old days when men aimed by sight and hope. Now the guns locked on automatically, following the invisible signals bouncing across the sky. The first kamikaze dove like a falling star. Alabama fired before the human eye could track it. The plane vanished in a burst of flame, debris splashing into the sea. But there was another, and another, and another, like arrows, like waves, like a swarm. For hours the fleet fought. Destroyers weaved like dancers to avoid explosions. Carriers covered the sky with fighters. Cruisers filled the air with fire. And in the center of it all, Alabama remained a fortress. One kamikaze nearly got through. It came low, skimming the water. The pilot locked on target with nothing but death in his eyes. For a moment, it seemed unstoppable. Then a single burst from Alabama's forward battery caught the plane like a hammer to glass. It broke apart before it even had time to burn. The men watched the pieces fall into the ocean. No cheers. No celebration. Just silence. Victory in war never feels like glory. It feels like relief. Okinawa fell. The road to Japan lay open. And while other ships burned, while thousands of sailors never saw another sunrise, Alabama survived every attack, every ambush, every mile of ocean thrown at her. She had become more than steel. She was an idea, proof that the future belonged not to the fastest plane, nor the bravest pilot, nor the most ancient empire, but to the mind that could see through darkness. When the war finally ended, Alabama returned home quietly, like a warrior who did not need a parade to prove what she had done. She was never sunk, never crippled, never defeated. She is still alive today, a museum in Mobile, Alabama, silent, unmoving, but still watching. Still guarding, still holding the memories of every night when men trusted her more than their own eyes. Visitors walk her decks not knowing that beneath their feet once lived the heartbeat of a storm. That within her steel walls the modern age of war was born. That radar, computers, and fire control changed everything, and Alabama was in the eye of that change. And somewhere inside her, in the rust and the machinery and the old echo of engines that no longer turn, the past still whispers. The night once belonged to the enemy. But we took it from them. And we never gave it back. This was her revenge, her legacy, her war. This was the steel rain.